At a family barbecue, I accidentally brushed against my brother-in-law. A sharp crack echoed across the patio as he slapped me in front of everyone, shouting, "Do not you ever touch me again! Clean this mess and get out!" My sister turned to me and demanded I apologize to him or leave, so I walked away. When they returned home, a massive shock was waiting for them. My name is Maya. I am 33 years old, and my family thinks I am just a low-level IT help desk worker who barely scrapes by. They have no idea that I am a forensic accountant and the secret owner of Shield Capital, a firm specializing in acquiring distressed debt. Last Sunday at my parents' house, my family made their final choice. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The sharp crack of the slap echoed across the backyard patio, silencing the upbeat jazz music and the lively chatter instantly. The force of Marcus hitting my face threw me completely off balance. I stumbled backward, my heels catching on the uneven edge of the stone pavers, and crashed hard into a stack of plastic lawn chairs. The heavy tray of drinks I had been carrying clattered to the ground, splashing ice and a few dark drops of barbecue sauce onto Marcus and his pristine white silk shirt. I lay there for a second, feeling the sharp sting of physical pain radiating through my jaw and down my neck. I could taste the warm metallic tang of blood pooling in the corner of my mouth. Above me, Marcus towered with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. He was a tall and striking African-American man who always wore custom Tom Ford suits and carried himself like he owned the entire world. Right now, his handsome features were contorted into a mask of pure rage. He pointed down at me and screamed that I should never touch him with my filthy hands. He ordered me to clean up the mess and get out of his sight immediately. I slowly pushed myself up from the tangled mess of broken plastic chairs. My cheek throbbed fiercely, but I did not shed a single tear. I had stopped crying over the cruel actions of this family a long time ago. I looked around the sunlit patio, seeking any sign of support. My cousins, aunts, and uncles were all frozen, holding their plates of grilled food, just staring at us in absolute shock. Not a single person stepped forward to help me up or ask if I was injured. I turned my gaze toward my parents, hoping just for a fraction of a second that seeing a grown man violently strike their daughter would finally break their spell of toxic favoritism. I waited for my father to yell at him for crossing the line. I waited for my mother to rush to my side and check my bleeding face. I waited for someone, anyone, to intervene and do the right thing. The afternoon breeze rustled the trees, but the silence from my family was deafening. They just watched me bleed. Instead of checking on my bleeding lip, my mother, Helen, practically shoved me aside to get to him. She grabbed a cloth napkin from the buffet table and sprinted toward Marcus, looking frantic and breathless. She babbled non-stop, telling Marcus how incredibly sorry she was, while dabbing desperately at the tiny brown stain on his expensive silk shirt. She begged him to forgive me, claiming I was always so clumsy and useless. She promised they would pay to have his shirt dry cleaned immediately or buy him a brand new one. She completely ignored the fact that her own daughter was bleeding on the patio stones. Then my sister Valerie marched over with heavy, angry steps. Valerie was 35, the undisputed golden child of the family, and a stay-at-home socialite whose entire identity was built around the fabricated wealth her husband projected to the world. She pointed her perfectly manicured finger right at my injured face. She yelled that I did that on purpose because I have always been jealous of him. She screamed that I have always been jealous of them both. She brought up the past, complaining that ever since Mom and Dad paid her full tuition at Yale, while I had to scrub dishes to pay for my cheap community college classes, I have tried to ruin her high-class life. She said I just cannot stand seeing her happy and wealthy. The absurdity of her statement was staggering, but this was how they always rewrote history to suit their narrative. I did not care about her Yale degree or her supposed high-class life. My father David stepped forward next, his face red with anger directed entirely at me. He pointed aggressively at the driveway. He demanded that I apologize to my brother-in-law right now. He proudly stated that Marcus manages their retirement funds and pays for their country club memberships, keeping our family respected in the wealthy community. He called me nothing but a broken IT girl and asked who gave me the right to have an attitude with a man of his stature. He told me to apologize to him or get off his property and never come back. I stood completely alone in the center of the patio. The afternoon sun beat down on us, but the chill from my own family was freezing my heart. They had just watched a man assault me, and they were demanding I apologize to him to protect their country club status and financial perks. I reached into the pocket of my jeans, feeling the cold metal of my car keys. I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the blood on my teeth and preparing my next move. I did not yell back at them. I did not defend myself or try to explain that I had merely tripped over a loose paver. I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand, leaving a red streak across my knuckles. I looked past my screaming sister and my cowardly parents locking eyes directly with Marcus. His arrogant smirk was fully in place, expecting me to cower and beg for forgiveness like I always did when we were kids. I looked at him and spoke with a voice that was dead calm and carried clearly across the silent yard. I told him that his shirt might cost $2,000, but the steel bracelets he was about to wear were absolutely free. The words hung in the warm summer air, confusing everyone for a brief second. Marcus scoffed loudly, crossing his arms over his chest to show his dominance. He mocked me, asking if I was really threatening him. He called me a delusional, broke IT girl and told me to go reboot a computer and leave the real adults alone. Valerie laughed, that mocking, high-pitched laugh she used whenever she felt superior to someone else. She sneered and called me psychotic. She told me to go back to my tiny apartment and stay away from her successful husband. I did not say another word to any of them. I turned my back on the entire group, gripped my keys tightly, and walked down the long, paved driveway. I could hear the immediate shift in the atmosphere behind me as soon as I walked away. The jazz music was turned back on. My father laughed loudly, offering Marcus a fresh beer to calm his nerves. My mother began apologizing to the guests again, assuring them that the silly drama was over and dinner would be served shortly. They dismissed me entirely, going right back to their party like I was nothing but a minor inconvenience that had finally been taken out with the trash. I climbed into my car, shutting the door and enclosing myself in the quiet, safe interior. I looked in the rearview mirror at my swollen cheek and the dried blood on my chin. The sadness I used to feel for this family was completely gone, replaced by a sharp, crystal-clear focus. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had kept on standby for 3 long months. "Attorney Vance," I said as soon as he answered. "Execute the eviction order on the Oakwood mansion immediately." I confirmed that he needed to do it right now and to bring the local police with him. I told my lawyer that my family had just chosen their side. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the house, feeling lighter and more free than I had in 30 years. My family thought they had just put me in my place. They had no idea that I was the one pulling the strings, and their entire fake world was about to collapse around them. I unlocked the door, climbed inside, and slammed it shut, enclosing myself in the quiet, safe interior of the cabin. The heavy silence of the car wrapped around me, blocking out the jazz music and the distant sound of clinking beer glasses. I reached up and pulled down the sun visor, staring into the small rectangular mirror. The physical evidence of my family's ultimate betrayal stared right back at me. My left cheek was already swelling, turning a deep, angry shade of red that would soon bloom into a massive purple bruise. Dried blood crusted the corner of my mouth and stained my chin. I stared at my own reflection, assessing the damage with complete clinical detachment. The deep, hollow sadness I used to feel for this family, the desperate yearning for their love and approval, was completely gone. The space it used to occupy in my chest was now filled with a sharp, crystal-clear focus. They thought I was a helpless victim. They thought they had just put me in my place. They thought they had won. I reached into my bag and pulled out my smartphone. I opened my contacts and bypassed the numbers for IT ticketing and software vendors. I scrolled down and tapped a specific number I had kept on standby for 3 long, agonizing months. The phone rang only twice before a crisp, professional voice answered on the other end. Attorney Vance speaking. I did not bother with pleasantries or greetings. My voice was sharp and commanding, stripping away the facade of the broke help desk worker and slipping effortlessly into the tone of a CEO. "Vance it is, Maya," I said, my eyes locked on the sprawling Oakwood mansion in my rearview mirror. "Execute the eviction order on the Oakwood property immediately." There was a brief pause on the line before my lawyer responded, his tone shifting into high gear. "Understood, Ms. Caldwell. We have had the paperwork finalized and signed off by the judge since last month. Shall I schedule it for Monday morning?" "No," I replied firmly, my gaze fixed on the majestic front door of the house where my parents and sister lived their lavish lie. "Do it right now. Call the local police precinct and coordinate the enforcement. I want squad cars in that driveway within the hour." Vance did not question the directive. He simply said, "Consider it done, Maya." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I put the car in drive, resting my foot on the brake for one final second. My family had just chosen their side to protect a violent man and a fragile illusion of wealth. They had no idea that their entire fake world was built on a foundation of distressed debt that my firm had quietly purchased. I eased my foot off the brake and pulled away from the curb, feeling lighter and more powerful than I had in my entire life. The tires of my 10-year-old sedan hummed against the asphalt as I merged onto the highway, leaving the manicured lawns and iron gates of the wealthy suburbs in my rearview mirror. The dull throb in my left cheek served as a steady rhythmic reminder of the physical line my family had just crossed. Yet as I navigated the evening traffic toward the sleek glass and steel skyline of downtown, the overwhelming sensation washing over me was not pain. It was absolute unfiltered clarity. For years I had played the part they assigned me, the quiet, unassuming IT girl who needed their pity and endured their mockery. I kept my head down and built my empire in the shadows, knowing that one day their greed would outpace their common sense. That day had finally arrived. My phone sitting in the center console began to vibrate violently. The screen lit up with a rapid-fire succession of notifications. It was the family group chat, appropriately named Family First. I kept my eyes on the road, letting the phone buzz angrily against the plastic cup holder. In the past, a barrage of messages from my mother or sister would have sent my heart rate skyrocketing. I would have pulled over immediately, hands shaking frantically, typing out paragraphs of apologies and explanations, trying to desperately smooth over whatever perceived slight I had committed. Not tonight. Tonight, I let them yell into the void. I caught a red light at the edge of the downtown district and finally glanced down at the glowing screen. My mother Helen had initiated the digital assault. Her text messages were blocks of frantic, aggressive text. "You ruined the entire barbecue, Maya," she wrote. "Marcus was generous enough to overlook your constant clumsiness, and you repay him with utter disrespect. Do you have any idea the amount of stress that man is under? He manages millions of dollars of our retirement funds. He is a financial genius. You are just a low-level help desk worker who can barely pay rent. Who gave you the right to have an attitude with someone of his caliber?" I read the words with a stone-cold expression. A financial genius. The irony was so rich it almost tasted sweet. Helen and David had handed over their entire life savings to Marcus, blindly trusting his custom suits and confident swagger. They had no idea that Marcus was swimming in toxic, leveraged debt. They did not know that his supposed investment firm was a house of cards, teetering on the edge of collapse, and they certainly did not know that my company, Shield Capital, had been quietly buying up every single one of his defaulted loans for pennies on the dollar. A second later, a message from my father David popped up beneath my mother's. The text was short, brutal, and intended to be the ultimate punishment. "Do not bother coming to Thanksgiving this year unless you are prepared to get down on your knees and beg Marcus for forgiveness." You are an absolute embarrassment to this family. Apologize or consider yourself completely cut off. I stared at the glowing screen as the traffic light turned green. Cut off. My father was threatening to cut off the daughter who secretly owned the mortgage to the very house he was currently sitting in. He was protecting a son-in-law who had just leveraged their family estate to cover his own catastrophic market losses. They were so blinded by the illusion of high society status that they were willingly handing the keys to their destruction over to a con artist. I accelerated through the intersection, guiding my car into the private underground parking garage of my luxury downtown condo building. I parked in my reserved spot, flanked by a concrete pillar and a security camera. I turned off the engine and sat in the quiet, dim light of the garage. My phone buzzed 3 more times. Valerie had joined the chat, adding a barrage of angry emojis and telling me I needed psychiatric help. I picked up the device. I did not type out a defense. I did not try to explain that Marcus was a violent fraud. I did not point out that they had just watched him draw blood from my face and sided with him anyway. I simply opened the keyboard, selected a single yellow thumbs-up emoji, and hit send. Then I tapped the settings icon in the top right corner of the chat and hit mute. The screen went dark. The relentless buzzing stopped. The profound absolute silence that filled the cabin of my car was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. With a single tap, I had severed the emotional chains they had wrapped around me since childhood. I dropped the phone into my leather bag, grabbed my keys, and stepped out of the car, ready to watch the dominoes fall. Miles away on the opposite side of the city, Marcus and Valerie were cruising down the interstate in their leased Porsche Cayenne. Valerie sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through the group chat, her perfectly manicured nails tapping aggressively against her phone screen. She laughed, a sharp, smug sound validating her husband's massive ego. She told Marcus that my father had officially banned me from Thanksgiving. She assured him that they had successfully put the pathetic little IT girl in her place once and for all. Marcus gripped the leather steering wheel, his jaw set in an arrogant, rigid line. He nodded, deeply satisfied with his display of power. He believed he had won. He believed his facade of untouchable wealth was impenetrable. They took the exit toward their lavish, sprawling estate, completely wrapped up in their shared delusion of superiority. They admired the leather seats, the smooth ride of the expensive car, and the undeniable status they believed they held over the rest of the world. They were completely and utterly oblivious. They had no idea that a procession of local police cruisers and a county sheriff were currently turning onto their pristine, manicured street. They had no idea that the trap they had built with their own greed and arrogance had just snapped shut. The smooth purr of the leased Porsche Cayenne engine provided a comforting soundtrack to Marcus and Valerie as they glided through the manicured streets of the upscale Oakwood neighborhood. The plush leather seats practically hugged them, offering a tactile reminder of the elite status they fought so desperately to project. Valerie adjusted the climate control, letting the cool air condition her flushed skin, while she admired her own reflection in the passenger window. She let out a soft, contented sigh, completely energized by the afternoon events. Putting Maya in her place always felt like a necessary recalibration of the universe. In Valerie's mind, the natural order had been restored. The golden child reigned supreme while the bitter outcast was banished back to the shadows. Marcus gripped the steering wheel with one hand, his custom Rolex catching the late afternoon sunlight. He projected an aura of complete invincibility, but beneath the expensive cologne and tailored silk shirt, a frantic energy hummed. He had spent the last 2 years desperately juggling distressed, debt-shifting money between shell companies and lying to investors, like his father-in-law, to keep his fabricated empire afloat. The pressure was suffocating, but moments like today, when he could exert absolute dominance over someone he deemed insignificant, fueled his ego and kept the panic at bay. He had successfully manipulated David into threatening his own daughter, solidifying his absolute control over the family assets. He felt like a king, returning to his castle, completely oblivious to the explosive reality waiting for him at the end of his block. The Cayenne turned onto their pristine, tree-lined street, rolling smoothly toward the massive wrought iron gates of the Oakwood estate. The sprawling mansion sat perfectly framed behind the imposing metal bars, a monument to the staggering credit card debt and illegal leverage Marcus had utilized to maintain their lifestyle. He eased the luxury SUV to a stop beside the stone security pillar, rolling down his window to punch his personalized code into the keypad. He pressed the sequence of numbers with practiced arrogance, expecting the heavy gates to swing inward with their usual obedient hum. Instead, the keypad let out a sharp, hostile beep. A small LED light flashed angry red. Access denied. Marcus frowned, his jaw tightening in irritation. He muttered a curse under his breath, assuming he had mistyped the code in his haste. He leaned further out the window and jabbed his finger against the metal buttons, pressing the numbers with aggressive force. Beep, red light, access denied. "What is taking so long?" Valerie snapped, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the engine. "I want to get inside and take these heels off. My feet are killing me, and I need a glass of wine after dealing with your psychotic sister-in-law." "The stupid gate is malfunctioning again," Marcus growled, slamming his fist against the side of the metal call box. "It is probably that incompetent security company. I told you we should have fired them last month. I am going to have their contract terminated by tomorrow morning." He shoved the car into park, ignoring Valerie as she let out a dramatic, irritated huff. He threw open the driver's side door and marched up the paved driveway toward the pedestrian's side gate. If the main electronic system was down, he would just bypass it manually. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his heavy ring of keys, and isolated the gold-plated key that opened the side entrance. He shoved the key toward the cylinder, fully expecting to turn the lock and assert his entry. The key did not fit. It did not even slide past the threshold of the keyhole. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the door handle in sheer confusion. He looked closer, his stomach executing a sudden violent drop. The brushed brass hardware he had personally selected for the estate was gone. In its place sat a heavy-duty industrial-grade black smart lock. The metal was thick, unyielding, and entirely foreign. The realization that someone had physically altered his property without his knowledge or consent sent a shockwave of violation crashing through his chest. He grabbed the handle and yanked it violently, rattling the metal frame, but the door remained securely locked. "Are you completely incompetent, Marcus?" Valerie yelled, her voice echoing shrilly from the passenger seat of the Porsche. "Just open the gate. It is 90 degrees out here, and I am not sitting in this driveway all evening." When Marcus did not answer, but instead continued to rattle the heavy black lock, Valerie let out a sound of pure exasperation. She shoved her door open and stepped out onto the hot pavement. Her designer wedges clicked sharply against the stone as she marched past the front of the vehicle, entirely out of patience. She bypassed Marcus at the side entrance and headed straight for the grand double doors of the main entryway, intending to use her own key. As she approached the dark mahogany doors, her eyes caught a flash of bright neon yellow. She stopped abruptly, her irritation morphing into acute confusion. Taped directly at eye-level dead center on the expensive wood was a large, crisp sheet of heavy legal paper. It looked entirely out of place, a garish blemish on their perfectly curated home. "What is this garbage?" Valerie demanded, reaching out and ripping the paper off the door with a loud tearing sound. "Who puts a flyer on our house?" She held the paper up, squinting at the bold black text printed across the bright yellow background. Marcus finally abandoned the side door and jogged over to her, his face flushed with anger and the first creeping edges of genuine panic. "Read it!" he barked, his voice tight with anxiety. "What does it say?" Valerie cleared her throat, her eyes scanning the heavy block letters. As she read the words, her haughty demeanor vanished completely, replaced by a sudden chilling dread. Her voice started out loud and indignant, but quickly dissolved into a trembling, fearful whisper. "Property foreclosed and seized." She read aloud the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. "New legal owner Shield Capital LLC. Trespassers will be arrested." Marcus turned the color of chalk. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. He snatched the thick yellow paper from her manicured hand, his eyes darting frantically across the legal jargon. He felt as if the ground beneath him had suddenly turned to liquid. Shield Capital LLC. He knew that name intimately. It was the aggressive, shadowy private equity firm that had been buying up all of his defaulted loans for the past year. They held all his debt. They held his entire life in their hands. But he had no idea they had moved to foreclose on the primary estate. And he absolutely did not know that Maya, the sister-in-law he had just physically assaulted and mocked, was the architect behind the firm, orchestrating his complete financial execution. Marcus stared at the bright yellow notice, his breathing turning shallow and rapid as the walls of his fraudulent empire collapsed around him. He opened his mouth to speak, to try and formulate some kind of lie or excuse to placate Valerie, who was now staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. Before a single word could leave his lips, a harsh, blinding light swept across the front of the house. The reflection of brilliant, flashing red and blue lights bounced off the yellow paper in his trembling hands. A heavy police cruiser had just pulled into the driveway, pulling up directly behind their leased Porsche, completely blocking their only path of escape. Two doors slammed shut in unison as two uniformed officers stepped out of the cruiser. The blinding rotation of red and blue lights painted the manicured front lawn in chaotic strokes. Valerie did not hesitate. Her ingrained sense of absolute entitlement propelled her forward before the officers had even cleared the front of their vehicle. She marched straight toward them, pointing a manicured finger back at the imposing mahogany double doors. "Officers, thank God you are here!" she shrieked, her voice carrying the hysterical pitch of a woman whose perfect reality was being mildly inconvenienced. "We have been targeted by vandals. Look at this. Someone has completely defaced our property. They glued some trashy yellow flyer to our custom doors and changed the locks. I want them found and I want them arrested immediately. This is a private gated community. Do you have any idea who my husband is?" Marcus stood entirely paralyzed on the stone steps. The yellow paper hung limply from his trembling fingers. He did not move to support his wife. He did not puff out his chest or adjust his designer watch. The arrogant alpha male who had violently assaulted me hours earlier had vanished, completely replaced by a cornered, desperate fraud. The lead officer, a tall man with a stern, deeply lined face, did not flinch at Valerie and her shrill demands. He walked past her with measured, deliberate steps, approaching the front porch. He shined a heavy black flashlight directly onto the yellow document Marcus was clutching. "Sir, I need you to step away from the door," the officer ordered, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or debate. "Hand me the notice." Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. He handed the paper over without a single word of protest. Valerie let out a loud, dramatic scoff, crossing her arms over her chest and tapping her expensive wedge heel against the pavement. "I do not understand why you are treating us like the criminals," she snapped, glaring at the officer. "My husband Marcus is a highly successful financial manager. We own this estate, free and clear. It was a cash purchase. Tell them, Marcus. Tell them to go arrest whatever low-life did this to our home." Marcus remained utterly silent. A cold sweat had broken out across his forehead, catching the glare of the police lights. The officer ignored Valerie entirely. He pulled a mobile dispatch device from his utility belt and tapped the screen. He held the device up to the bright yellow paper, scanning the square QR code printed in the bottom right corner. The device chimed a sharp electronic chirp that seemed to echo in the quiet, upscale neighborhood. The officer read the screen, his eyes narrowing slightly before he looked back up at the couple. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice," the officer said bluntly. "Nobody vandalized anything. According to the county registry and the verified court order on my screen, this property was officially foreclosed on and auctioned off by the bank 3 months ago." Valerie froze, her arms uncrossed, dropping to her sides as her mouth opened in a silent gasp. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice losing its hysterical edge and dropping into a confused, breathless whisper. "That is impossible. We do not have a mortgage." The officer looked down at his screen again, scrolling through the official summary. "You had 3, actually, all of them severely defaulted. The property was seized by the bank. Shield Capital, LLC, purchased the estate in full with a cash wire this morning. They are the new legal owners. The court order gave them immediate right of possession. They hired a bonded contractor to secure the premises and change the locks at noon today. As of this exact moment, you are both criminally trespassing on private property. The words hung in the chilling night air: foreclosed, defaulted, trespassing. Valerie slowly turned her head to look at Marcus. The pristine, untouchable illusion of her high-class life was shattering into a million jagged pieces right in front of her. The country club memberships, the designer dresses, the leased Porsche sitting in the driveway, it was all built on a mountain of illegal debt. Marcus had lied to her. He had lied to our parents. He had gambled away their entire fortune and leveraged their home to cover his tracks. "You told me it was paid off," Valerie whispered, staring at her husband as if she was looking at a complete stranger. "You told my father the deed was in our name. You took his retirement money, Marcus. Where is the money?" Marcus took a step back, raising his hands defensively. "Val, listen to me," he stammered, his voice shaking. "The market took a massive hit. I just needed a little more time to move some liquid assets. I can fix this. I know people. I can make a few calls and get the house back. It is just a temporary cash flow problem." Valerie let out a sound that was half sob and half scream. The reality of her sudden, absolute poverty crashed into her with the force of a freight train. She refused to accept it. She had spent her entire life looking down on people like me, reveling in her superior status. The idea that she was now homeless and bankrupt was a reality her fragile narcissistic mind simply could not process. "No!" she shrieked, lunging forward and snatching the yellow legal notice right out of the officer's hand. "This is a mistake. This is an illegal seizure. I am not leaving my house. I am going to call this fake company right now, and I am going to sue them into absolute oblivion." She squinted at the bright yellow paper, her eyes frantically scanning the bold text until she found what she was looking for. Printed at the very bottom beneath the warning of arrest was a direct contact number for the Property Management Division of Shield Capital, LLC. Valerie pulled her phone from her designer handbag, her fingers shaking so violently she could barely punch in the numbers. She hit the call button and jammed her thumb against the speakerphone icon, thrusting the phone out in front of her like a weapon. Marcus watched her in horrified silence. The police officer placed his hand resting casually on his duty belt, waiting for the inevitable outcome. The phone rang loud and clear, filling the driveway with a sharp electronic trill. It rang once, it rang twice. Then the line clicked open. The connection was crystal clear. Valerie took a deep, ragged breath, preparing to unleash the full force of her wrath upon whatever unfortunate customer service representative had dared to answer the call. "I will have your jobs," she prepared to scream. "I will own your entire company by the time my lawyers are finished with you." But she never got the chance to speak a single word. A crisp, calm, and undeniably familiar voice echoed from the speakerphone, cutting through the flashing red and blue lights and the heavy summer night. "Hello, you have reached Maya, CEO of Shield Capital. I assume you need time to get your garbage out of my new house, sister." I ended the call before Valerie could even draw breath for a response. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and let out a long, slow breath. The quiet hum of my car engine was a stark, comforting contrast to the absolute chaos I had just unleashed upon my sister and her fraudulent husband. I drove the rest of the way to my downtown condo, poured myself a single glass of expensive red wine, and slept more soundly than I had in a decade. The peace did not last long. At exactly 7 the next morning, my phone began to vibrate violently against my nightstand. I ignored the first 3 calls from my mother, letting them roll straight to voicemail. Then a text message illuminated the screen. It was from my father, David. The message was entirely devoid of any warmth or familial greeting. It was a strict, non-negotiable demand. "Get over here right this second for an emergency family meeting. You have a lot of explaining to do." I read the message twice, marveling at the sheer audacity. They still thought they held the power. They still believed I was the subservient scapegoat who would scurry over and beg for their forgiveness. I decided to grant their request, but I would not be arriving as the broken daughter they expected. I walked into my walk-in closet and bypassed the cheap clearance rack clothes I usually wore around them. Instead, I pulled out a sharp, tailored charcoal gray suit that cost more than Marcus made in a legitimate month. I paired it with sleek black heels and pulled my hair back into a severe knot. I looked like exactly what I was, a corporate predator, ready for a hostile takeover. I grabbed my sleek black leather briefcase, the one containing the full, unredacted scope of Marcus and his absolute financial ruin, and headed out the door. When I arrived at the house I grew up in, I did not bother knocking. I pushed the heavy oak front door open and stepped into the grand foyer. The air was thick with tension and the suffocating scent of my mother's expensive floral perfume. I walked straight into the main living room and took in the utterly ridiculous scene playing out before me. Valerie was curled up on the plush velvet sofa, putting on an absolute masterclass in theatrical victimhood. She was pressing a tissue to her perfectly dry eyes, letting out dramatic little hiccups, and clinging desperately to Marcus's arm. She looked like a tragic heroine from a cheap soap opera. Marcus, however, was the truly staggering part of the equation. He sat beside his weeping wife, casually sipping coffee from a delicate porcelain mug, looking entirely unbothered. His legs were crossed at the ankle, resting casually on the edge of the antique rug. He wore a crisp polo shirt and a smug, arrogant smirk. He looked exactly like a man who believed his lies were completely bulletproof. He actually had the nerve to roll his eyes when I walked into the room, as if my presence was merely a minor administrative annoyance he had to endure. Before I could even set my briefcase down, the assault began. They did not turn their fury toward the con artist sitting on their couch. They did not demand an explanation from the man who had just lost his massive estate to foreclosure and lied to them about it for months. Instead, they directed all their venom entirely at me. My mother, Helen, marched across the expensive Persian rug, her face flushed a deep mottled crimson. She stopped inches away from me, her eyes blazing with furious indignation. "What is wrong with you?" she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "If you got lucky and bought that house cheap, you need to transfer the deed back to Marcus right now. He is just having temporary cash flow issues. You are trying to humiliate our family." I stared at her, letting her unhinged logic wash over me. She actually believed I had somehow stumbled into purchasing a multi-million-dollar estate by pure dumb luck. She believed her precious golden son-in-law was merely experiencing a brief hiccup in his otherwise stellar career. My father stepped up beside her, his face twisted in a scowl of profound disappointment. He pointed a rigid finger at my chest. "Your mother is right, Maya. We know you have always been insanely jealous of Valerie and Marcus, but orchestrating this little stunt behind our backs is a new low even for you. Marcus handles extremely complex financial portfolios. Things get tied up in court. Assets get temporarily frozen. It is the nature of high-level wealth management. You took advantage of a bureaucratic glitch to try and steal their home. You will call whoever you work for at this Shield Capital place, and you will undo this mess immediately, or I swear to you I will have my lawyers sue you for everything you own." I looked from my red-faced father to my screaming mother, then I looked past them to the couch. Valerie was glaring at me with raw, unfiltered hatred, while Marcus took another slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. He offered me a tiny, condescending wink. He honestly thought he had them so completely brainwashed that I would be forced to hand back the keys to his kingdom just to keep the family peace. He thought the heavy pressure of my parents' expectations would crush me into submission, just like it always had. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. I did not try to explain that there was no bureaucratic glitch and that Marcus was drowning in toxic, leveraged debt. Words were entirely useless against their deeply ingrained delusions. They needed something physical, something indisputable. I stepped forward smoothly, bypassing my parents and walking directly up to the edge of the expensive glass coffee table positioned in front of the sofa. I placed my sleek leather briefcase flat on the glass. I snapped the twin metal latches, opened the sharp clicking sound slicing through the tense silence of the living room. I reached inside, bypassing the pens and the legal pads. I pulled out a thick, heavy stack of foreclosure documents, bank statements, and default notices. I raised the massive stack of paper high in the air and threw it down onto the glass coffee table, making a loud, echoing thud. The sharp crack of the heavy paper hitting the glass sent a shockwave through the room. My mother flinched physically, stepping back as if the documents themselves were radioactive. My father blinked, his mouth falling open slightly. On the couch, Valerie let out a tiny, indignant gasp, but kept her manicured hands firmly clasped around Marcus's arm. I did not give them a single second to recover their righteous indignation. Temporary cash flow issues. I repeated the words rolling off my tongue with a sharp, humorless laugh. Are you completely out of your minds? The Porsche sitting in your driveway right now is leased Valerie. The Tom Ford suits your husband is wearing the custom Rolex he flashes at the country club. The lavish dinners you insist on hosting, they are all bought on credit cards that have been maxed out for over 18 months. I bought the house because I saw Marcus's name on a distressed debt ledger 6 months ago. He has been bankrupt for 2 years. The absolute silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. My father stared at me, his brow furrowing as his brain struggled to process the information. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice losing its booming authority and dropping into a gravelly whisper. "You are a help desk worker. You fix computers. You do not know how to read financial ledgers." I smiled, a slow, cold expression that made him take another step back. "I have not been a help desk worker since my first year out of college, Dad. I am a forensic accountant. I specialize in tracking distressed assets, corporate embezzlement, and high-level financial fraud. I track where the money goes when men like your golden son-in-law try to hide their catastrophic failures. I am the person companies hire to sift through the wreckage when a con artist builds a house of cards." "That is a lie!" Valerie shrieked, her voice pitching upward into a hysterical screech. She uncurled from the sofa and sprang to her feet, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You are a jealous, pathetic liar. You have always been obsessed with my life. You have always wanted what I have. Marcus is a genius. He manages millions. You are just trying to ruin my perfect marriage because you are going to die alone and miserable." I did not raise my voice to match her hysteria. I simply tapped the top of the massive stack of paper resting on the coffee table. "Read it, Valerie," I challenged, my voice dropping to a deadly calm register. "Go ahead, pick up the top sheet. It is the official foreclosure notice. Below that is the repossession order for your precious Cayenne, which is scheduled to be towed before midnight tonight. Below that is a detailed list of 13 separate shell companies Marcus registered in Delaware. He has been shifting your parents' retirement funds through those accounts to pay off his furious investors. It is a classic Ponzi scheme, and it collapsed 3 months ago." Valerie shook her head violently, refusing to look down at the table. She looked at our parents instead, her eyes wide and pleading. "Do not listen to her, Mom. She is insane. Make her leave." But my father was not looking at Valerie. He was staring at the stack of documents. He stepped forward, moving past my mother, and reached for the top pages. His hands were trembling. "David, do not indulge her," my mother snapped, crossing her arms defensively. "She is clearly having some sort of mental breakdown." My father ignored her. He picked up the first few pages and began to read. I watched his eyes scan the bold legal print. I watched the arrogant certainty drain from his features, replaced by a sickly gray pallor. He flipped to the next page and then the next, his breathing turning shallow and ragged. "Let me help you out, Dad," I offered, leaning forward and tapping a specific paragraph on the third page. "Look at the date right there, October 14th. That was the day Marcus asked you for an additional $200,000 to secure that incredible commercial real estate venture he pitched you at Thanksgiving. Do you see where that money actually went?" My father swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. "It went directly to a high-interest offshore loan he defaulted on the week prior," I continued mercilessly. "And look at the bank statements behind that page. Notice the highlighted red sections. Those are bounced checks. Dozens of them. Checks written to contractors, landscapers, the country club, even the cleaning staff at the Oakwood estate. He has been writing bad checks for half a year, hoping to buy enough time to con another investor." That is impossible, my mother whispered, her voice trembling as the reality of my words finally began to penetrate her denial. Marcus has an impeccable reputation. He is a vice president at his firm. He was fired from his firm 14 months ago, Mom, I corrected, delivering the final crushing blow. He has been leaving the house every morning in a tailored suit and sitting in a rented co-working space, pretending to go to a job that no longer exists. Valerie let out a strangled sob. She turned to Marcus, grabbing his shoulders and shaking him. Tell them she is lying, Marcus. Tell them she fabricated all of this. Defend yourself. Show them your portfolio. The entire room turned to look at the man sitting on the sofa. For the past 20 minutes, he had been the center of this hurricane, yet he had not spoken a single word. My parents stared at him, their expressions morphing from confusion to sheer, undeniable terror. Valerie looked at him with desperate, pleading eyes, begging him to restore the illusion of their flawless elite existence. Marcus did not offer an excuse. He did not jump up and defend his honor. He did not yell or threaten to sue me. Instead, he slowly lowered his delicate porcelain coffee mug onto a coaster. He uncrossed his legs, planting his expensive leather loafers firmly on the antique rug. A strange, chilling smirk spread across his face. Then Marcus began to laugh. It was not a nervous chuckle or an embarrassed scoff. It was a slow, dark, deeply arrogant laugh that echoed off the high ceilings of the living room. He raised his hands and began to clap, bringing his palms together in a slow, mocking rhythm. The sharp sound of his clapping filled the dead silence of the room. Clack, clack, clack. Marcus let the slow, rhythmic clapping drag out for a few agonizing seconds. He rose from the velvet sofa with the languid grace of a predator who had just spotted a particularly weak prey. He did not look at the heavy stack of foreclosure documents resting on the glass coffee table. He did not even glance at the glaring red bank stamps or the highlighted bounced checks. Instead, he smoothed the lapels of his tailored polo shirt and fixed his gaze directly on my father. "Bravo, Maya," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Truly a spectacular performance. I always knew you harbored a secret obsession with my success, but fabricating an entire financial collapse to get your parents' attention is a bold new strategy. I have to admit, I am almost impressed by the sheer volume of fake paperwork you managed to print out." I stood my ground, watching the master manipulator go to work. He was cornered, but a cornered narcissist is often when they are at their most dangerous. He knew exactly which buttons to push with David and Helen. He knew they desperately needed an excuse to ignore the terrifying truth sitting right in front of them. "David, look at her." Marcus continued, shaking his head with a theatrical sigh of pity. "She is a glorified spreadsheet reader. She spends her days crunching numbers in a cubicle somewhere entirely disconnected from the actual reality of high-tier wealth management. She sees a strategic corporate restructuring, and her tiny little mind immediately screams bankruptcy. It is actually quite sad. She simply does not have the intellectual capacity to comprehend the maneuvers required to shield massive assets from market volatility." My father blinked, the rigid tension in his shoulders beginning to loosen just a fraction. He wanted to believe Marcus. He needed to believe Marcus because the alternative was admitting he had handed his entire life savings over to a fraud. Marcus sensed the shift in the room instantly. He stepped around the coffee table, completely turning his back on me and placing a reassuring hand on my father's shoulder. "David, listen to me. Do you honestly think a bankrupt man would be handling the kind of capital I manage? Just last week, I executed a highly classified transfer for you. I moved your entire $2 million retirement fund out of those stagnant mutual funds and directly into an exclusive high-yield offshore crypto project. It is an invite-only liquidity pool. The returns are going to be astronomical. It is the kind of aggressive wealth generation Maya could never even dream of understanding." I listened to the brazen lie and felt a dark, heavy satisfaction settle deep in my chest. He had just handed me the final nail for his own coffin. He actually thought throwing the word crypto around would completely blind them to the reality that he had just admitted to moving their money without providing a single shred of legal documentation. and the truly terrifying part was that he was absolutely right. The air in the living room seemed to instantly change. The heavy, suffocating panic that had gripped my parents just moments before evaporated completely. The magic words had been spoken. Exclusive, high yield, $2 million. Marcus had dangled the illusion of elite wealth right in front of their faces, and they lunged for it like starving animals. "He is right, David!" My mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as a massive sigh of relief escaped her lips. Of course he is right. Marcus is a visionary. He handles portfolios for senators and tech CEOs. Why on earth would we listen to a jealous, bitter girl who has never achieved anything of value in her entire life? Marcus offered my mother a charming, appreciative smile before turning his attention back to his wife. Valerie was still sitting on the sofa, her fake tears drying instantly as the promise of new money washed over her. Marcus reached down and gently took her manicured hands in his, pulling her to her feet. "Valerie, babe, listen to me," Marcus murmured, his voice dropping into a smooth, intimate register, perfectly calibrated to stroke her massive ego. "Let her keep that trashy house. Oakwood is getting overcrowded with new money anyway, and the architecture was completely dated. I was planning on surprising you for our anniversary, but we might as well do it now. I am flying us out to the Hamptons next week. We are going to buy a bigger estate, oceanfront property, private beach. We are going to upgrade our entire life and leave this pathetic jealousy behind us." Valerie let out a sharp, breathless laugh, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. She wrapped her arms around Marcus, burying her face in his shoulder. "Oh, Marcus," she cooed, glaring at me over his arm. "You are so right. That house was practically falling apart anyway. Let Maya play in our garbage. It is the only way she will ever get to experience true luxury." The united front was completely restored. The delusion was firmly locked back into place, solid and impenetrable. My parents had been given the perfect excuse to discard my warnings, and they took it with vicious enthusiasm. They turned their collective fury back on me, their faces twisted with a familiar toxic hatred. "You are completely psychotic!" Helen shrieked, pointing a shaking finger toward the front door. "How dare you come into this house and try to destroy your sister's marriage? You are a toxic, jealous little liar. You have spent your entire life trying to drag Valerie down because you know you will never be half the woman she is. You forged these documents just to humiliate us." My father stepped forward, his chest puffed out, his face dark red with rage. "I am utterly disgusted by you, Maya," he bellowed, his voice rattling the crystal chandelier overhead. "I should have known better than to expect anything decent from you. Marcus is making us millions. He is securing our legacy while you sit here playing childish, vindictive games. Pack up your fake papers and get out of my house. I do not ever want to see your face in this home again. Consider yourself completely cut off. You are no longer a part of this family." Valerie let out a smug, triumphant laugh, clinging tighter to her husband. Marcus watched me over her shoulder, his arrogant smirk permanently etched onto his face. He had won. He had successfully weaponized their greed and their inherent disdain for me, shutting down the threat and securing his position as the family savior. He waited for me to crumble. He waited for the tears, the frantic apologies, the desperate scrambling retreat of the defeated outcast. I did not move a single inch. I did not reach for the briefcase. I did not drop my gaze. I did not let a single emotion cross my face. I stood perfectly still, rooted to the floor like a statue carved from ice. I slowly tilted my head to the side and locked my eyes directly onto my father. I stared at him with a dead, piercing silence that slowly began to drain the triumphant energy right out of the room. The dead, piercing silence stretched until it became a physical weight pressing down on the grand living room. The triumphant sneer on my father's face began to falter, melting into a look of deep, profound unease. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing nervously toward Marcus for reassurance. Marcus, however, was completely frozen. His hands were suspended mid-clap, his palms hovering inches apart as if he had suddenly forgotten how to move. The echo of his mocking applause faded into the high vaulted ceiling, leaving nothing but the sound of my mother's sharp, anxious breathing. I broke eye contact with my father and looked down at the glass coffee table. Slowly, And with absolute deliberate precision, I reached forward and grabbed the thick stack of foreclosure documents. I tapped the heavy edges of the paper against the glass, aligning them perfectly before sliding them back into my sleek leather briefcase. I snapped the twin metal latches shut. The sharp metallic clicks sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. "What are you doing?" my father demanded, his voice lacking the booming authority it had commanded just seconds prior. "I told you to get out of my house." I picked up the briefcase by its sturdy handle and rested it against my thigh, letting the smooth leather ground me. $2 million. I said, my voice entirely devoid of emotion, ringing out with perfect clarity. I let the staggering number hang in the air, allowing its sheer weight to settle heavily over my parents. "Tell me, Dad, did you actually check the credentials of this groundbreaking crypto project before you blindly authorized the wire transfer? Did you speak to a single independent financial advisor? Did you demand a prospectus or a verified audit from a third-party firm? Did you even bother to ask for a basic legal contract?" My father puffed out his chest, his face flushing a mottled purple as he attempted to rebuild his shattered bravado. "I do not need to explain my high-level financial decisions to a jealous, spiteful girl. Marcus is family. He handles elite portfolios for people with real wealth. He assured me the liquidity pool was completely secure and primed for explosive exponential growth. He showed me the institutional backing. He explained the algorithm." I let out a soft, humorless laugh that made my mother flinch and step closer to the wall. "Let me guess," I said, stepping away from the glass coffee table and moving closer to where my father stood. "Marcus told you it was an exclusive invite-only fund. He probably threw around flashy buzzwords like decentralized finance, blockchain leverage, and algorithmic yield generation to make it sound incredibly sophisticated and totally beyond your understanding. And I am willing to bet my entire career that he told you this hyper-secure, ultra-elite fund was called Phantom Capital." The effect was instantaneous and absolute. On the velvet sofa, Marcus let out a sharp, strangled gasp. The arrogant smirk that had been plastered across his face vanished entirely, wiped clean as if it had never existed. His wide, terrified eyes snapped toward me, filled with a raw, primal panic. He tried to speak, but his throat seized, producing only a pathetic, wet wheeze. His hands dropped to his sides, shaking so violently that they slapped against the leather cushions. He reached blindly for his porcelain coffee mug, intending to take a sip and feign nonchalance, but his trembling fingers knocked against the rim. The mug tipped over, spilling hot, dark coffee across the pristine white fabric of Valerie's expensive designer skirt. Valerie shrieked, jumping up from the couch and slapping wildly at the dark stain blooming across her lap. "Marcus, what is wrong with you?" she yelled, her voice shrill with indignation. "You just ruined my outfit." Marcus did not even look at her. He did not apologize or grab a napkin. He sat completely paralyzed, staring at me with the horrifying realization of a man who knew he was walking straight to the gallows. The color had drained completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. He looked like a corpse. Valerie finally stopped dabbing at her ruined skirt and looked at her husband. Her expression morphed from petty irritation to genuine alarm. She had never seen Marcus look like this. She had never seen the invincible financial genius look so small, so fragile, and so utterly terrified. "Marcus," she whispered, reaching out and shaking his shoulder. "Marcus, tell them she is lying. Tell them Phantom Capital is real." He could not speak. The utter silence from the man who always had a slick excuse or a smooth lie spoke volumes. My mother took a trembling step forward, her hands clutching the pearl necklace resting against her collarbone. "David," she whimpered, her voice cracking with mounting dread. "David, what is Phantom Capital? Why is Marcus looking like that?" I turned my attention back to my father, watching the color drain from his own face as he looked from me to the trembling fraud sitting on his couch. "Phantom Capital is not a high-yield crypto liquidity pool, Dad," I explained, my voice striking like a hammer against the fragile glass of his delusion. "Phantom Capital is a holding account registered to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. It was set up precisely 48 hours before you wired your entire life savings into it. It has no website. It has no board of directors. It has no digital assets. It has a single sole proprietor named Marcus. My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He reached out and grabbed the back of an armchair, leaning his entire body weight against it to keep from collapsing. The money did not go into the market. I continued, taking another step closer to him, forcing him to look me in the eye. The money went directly into that holding account, and within 24 hours, it was systematically dispersed to pay off 4 different aggressive creditors who were threatening Marcus with severe criminal litigation. He did not invest your $2 million, Dad. He used your entire retirement fund to buy himself a few more months of freedom. That is impossible. My father wheezed, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the chair. He showed me the digital portal. He showed me the balance. It was gaining interest. I saw it with my own eyes. You saw a mocked-up spreadsheet designed to keep you quiet while he drained your accounts, I corrected smoothly. He is a con artist, and you handed him the keys to your future because you were too busy admiring his tailored suits to look at his actual ledger. You are lying! Valerie screamed from the sofa, her voice cracking with hysteria. She pointed a shaking finger at me, tears streaming down her flushed face. You are just trying to ruin us. You are trying to bankrupt my family because you are jealous. Dad, do not listen to her. She is a vindictive psychopath. My mother rushed forward, grabbing my father's arm. David, tell her to leave. Throw her out. She is trying to destroy this family. Get her out of my house right now. I did not flinch at their screaming. I did not back away from their furious, desperate denial. I stood my ground, the heavy briefcase resting against my leg, and locked my eyes onto my father. The blustering rage had vanished from his face, replaced by a profound, sickening terror. He knew. Deep down, beneath the layers of pride and arrogance, he knew I was telling the truth. I raised my hand and pointed a single steady finger toward the expensive smartphone resting on the edge of the glass coffee table. Open your banking app right now, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly, chilling whisper. Log in and check your retirement balance. I dare you. My father stared at me. He looked at the heavy leather briefcase resting against my leg. He looked down at his phone sitting perfectly still on the glass coffee table. The silence in the room stretched, pulling taut like a wire about to snap. My father stared at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, before slowly shifting his gaze down to the heavy glass coffee table. The sleek, titanium smartphone rested there, reflecting the warm, ambient light of the crystal chandelier overhead. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He reached out with a hand that trembled so violently it looked as though he were standing in freezing rain. He picked up the phone. The screen illuminated, casting a harsh blue glow across his pale face. I watched him swipe his thumb across the glass. His hands were shaking too badly. The facial recognition failed. He had to type in his passcode manually. He messed up the first attempt. He let out a ragged breath, his thumb hovering over the keypad before slowly punching in the numbers again. The banking app opened. The little loading wheel spun in the center of the screen. For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody breathed. Marcus sat entirely frozen on the velvet couch, the spilled coffee soaking into the cushions around him. Valerie clutched her ruined skirt, her eyes darting frantically between her husband and her father. My mother stood completely paralyzed, her hands clamped over her mouth. Then the loading wheel disappeared. The account dashboard populated. My father did not speak. He did not yell. His entire body simply went slack. The blood drained from his face with such terrifying speed that I thought he was going to suffer a massive coronary right there on the Persian rug. His knees buckled slightly. The expensive smartphone slipped from his slick, sweaty grip. It fell, hitting the glass coffee table with a sharp cracking sound before sliding off the edge and landing on the floor. Helen rushed forward. She shoved past David and dropped to her knees on the expensive rug. She snatched the phone up with shaking hands. She squinted at the bright screen, her eyes scanning the digital numbers. Then she screamed. It was not a dignified gasp or a polite country club shriek. It was a raw, guttural sound of absolute, unadulterated terror. It was the sound of a woman watching 35 years of carefully curated wealth, social climbing, and arrogant security vanish into thin air. She dropped the phone as if it had burned her skin and collapsed back onto her heels, burying her face in her hands and sobbing hysterically. The screen of the phone remained lit, facing the ceiling. Even from where I stood, I could see the large, bold font displaying his primary retirement account balance. $0. Total absolute panic erupted. The polished, refined facade of my parents' household shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The reality of their financial annihilation crashed over them like a tidal wave, and the sheer violence of their reaction was staggering to witness. David snapped. The arrogant, composed patriarch who had just ordered me out of his home vanished completely. He let out a roar of primal fury and lunged across the coffee table. He did not care about the antique glass or the spilled coffee. He slammed into Marcus, grabbing the younger man by the crisp collar of his expensive designer polo shirt. "Where is my money, Marcus?" David bellowed, spittle flying from his lips as he hauled his son-in-law up from the velvet sofa. "Where is the 2 million?" Marcus stumbled forward, his polished Wall Street persona disintegrating instantly. The smug, condescending financial genius was gone. In his place was a terrified, cornered con artist. He threw his hands up defensively, trying to pry my father's rigid fingers off his collar. "David, please, David, you have to calm down." Marcus stammered, his voice pitching high with panic. He was sweating profusely, beads of moisture shining on his forehead. "It is just market volatility. It is a temporary lockup period." Market volatility. David screamed, shaking Marcus so hard that the younger man's head snapped back and forth. "The balance is 0. Every single penny is gone. Where did you send my money?" "It is a liquidity protocol," Marcus babbled desperately, throwing out empty financial jargon like a shield. "It is a temporary lockup period, David. The funds are migrating across the blockchain. The smart contracts require a 72-hour illiquidity phase to generate the maximum yield. I swear to you the money is safe. It is perfectly safe." He sounded utterly pathetic. He was drowning in his own lies, and everyone in the room finally knew it. David shoved Marcus backward. Marcus tripped over the edge of the coffee table and crashed hard onto the floor, taking a decorative side table down with him in a clatter of broken ceramics. I stood back and watched the chaos unfold. I reached down to the glass table, gathering my thick stack of foreclosure documents and default notices. I tapped the heavy edges of the paper against the glass, aligning them perfectly before sliding them back into my sleek leather briefcase. I snapped the twin metal latches shut. The sharp metallic clicks went completely unnoticed over the sound of my father bellowing at his golden son-in-law. I packed my bag with total clinical detachment. As a forensic accountant, I had stood in dozens of corporate boardrooms and watched corrupt executives realize the game was finally over. The anatomy of a collapsed Ponzi scheme is always exactly the same. The initial arrogant denial, the desperate deployment of confusing technical jargon, the sudden violent realization that the money is truly gone. I watched them tear each other apart without a single shred of pity. These were the people who had called me a failure. These were the people who had dismissed my career, treated me like a subservient outcast, and worshipped the ground this fraudulent parasite walked on. Now they were weeping over an empty digital ledger. Valerie was hyperventilating. She looked at Marcus cowering on the floor amid the broken ceramics. She looked at my sleek leather briefcase now securely closed. The illusion of her Hamptons mansion, her private beaches, and her infinite elite wealth shattered before her eyes. She was married to a bankrupt criminal, and the reality was finally suffocating her. She whipped her head around and locked her panicked, tear-filled eyes on me. She realized in that moment that I was the only person in the room who actually understood the mechanics of the financial slaughter that had just occurred. She abandoned her husband and lunged toward me, grabbing my arm with claw-like fingers. "Fix this!" Valerie screamed, shaking my arm. Her face twisted in a mask of hysterical entitlement. "You are an accountant, Maya. You know how computers work. Fix it right now. Hack into the system and reverse the wire transfer. Hack into the blockchain and get our money back. Do your job and get it back right now. She actually believed I could just type a few lines of code and undo months of calculated financial fraud. She believed the world bent to her hysterical demands. I calmly reached down and peeled her shaking fingers off my suit jacket. I stepped back, creating a physical boundary between us. I tilted my head and looked at my frantic, weeping sister, delivering the final fatal truth with absolutely zero remorse. It is not in a system, Valerie, I said, my voice slicing through the frantic noise of the room. The money is not migrating across a blockchain. It is not locked up in a smart contract, and it is not generating a high-yield return. I looked down at Marcus, who was staring up at me from the floor, his eyes wide with the knowledge that his ultimate secret was about to be dragged into the light. I looked back at Valerie and shook my head slowly. Your husband does not trade crypto, Valerie. He gambles. He has a massive offshore sports betting addiction. Your father's $2 million retirement fund is not in a system. It is in the hands of illegal bookies. The truth hung in the suffocating air, heavy and absolute. For a fraction of a second, the grand living room stood perfectly still. Then Marcus snapped. The pathetic, cowering fraud vanished, replaced instantly by a cornered, desperate animal realizing his trap had finally sprung shut. With a sudden, explosive burst of violent energy, he shoved David backward. He did not just push his father-in-law. He launched his entire body weight against the older man's chest. David, already off balance and reeling from the devastating shock of his empty bank account, went flying backward. He slammed hard into the heavy leather armchair, his arms flailing wildly before he crumpled awkwardly to the Persian rug. Marcus stood over him, his chest heaving, his tailored designer polo shirt torn at the collar from David's desperate grip. The charismatic, polished Wall Street facade shattered completely, leaving behind nothing but pure, unadulterated malice. His face was flushed a deep, ugly red, and the thick veins in his neck bulged against his skin. You think I cared about your retirement? Marcus spat, his voice echoing off the high-vaulted ceiling. The words were laced with years of venom and suppressed toxic hatred. I took it. I took every single cent. He kicked the broken pieces of the ceramic side table out of his way, glaring down at David with absolute withering contempt. You elitist snobs looked down on me for years. You sat in your ridiculous country clubs, sipping expensive scotch, judging my background, judging my family, waiting for me to prove I was worthy of your precious daughter. You expected me to be the golden boy. You paraded me around your ridiculous galas and charity dinners, introducing me as the financial genius who managed elite portfolios. You needed me to look successful so you could brag to your insufferable friends. Marcus stepped closer, looming over the man whose life savings he had just incinerated. You expected me to fund your pathetic country club lifestyle to prove I was one of the good ones. Do you have any idea how much it costs to keep up the illusion of elite wealth for people like you? The leased luxury cars, the designer clothes Valerie demanded just to keep up appearances. I had creditors threatening to break my legs, and you people were whining about upgrading your kitchen appliances. I used your money to pay off my own debts, and I do not regret a single second of it. Helen let out a strangled, breathless wheeze. Her legs gave out completely beneath her. She collapsed onto the floor beside the glass coffee table, her hands clutching her pearl necklace so tightly that the string snapped. The tiny, expensive pearls bounced and rolled across the hardwood floor, a perfect physical metaphor for the complete scattering of her privileged life. She began hyperventilating, her chest heaving in rapid, shallow gasps as her entire reality dissolved into ashes. She was no longer an untouchable, wealthy matriarch. She was the wife of a ruined man, staring at the arrogant architect of their absolute destruction. Valerie remained completely frozen on the velvet couch. She did not move to help her mother. She did not rush to comfort her father. She simply sat there, staring at the man she had married, her mouth hanging slightly open in catatonic shock. She looked at her ruined designer skirt stained with dark coffee, and then at Marcus. The Hamptons mansion, the private beaches, the elite status she had wielded like a weapon against me her entire life. All of it was a lie funded by a desperate gambling addict. Her world was completely destroyed. Marcus did not spare his wife a single glance. He spun around and marched purposefully toward the grand foyer. He threw open the heavy oak doors of the hallway closet, violently tossing expensive winter coats onto the polished marble floor. He reached into the dark corner of the top shelf and hauled down a massive, bulging black duffel bag. He dropped it onto the marble with a heavy thud. It was a go bag packed with cash and passports. He had been preparing for this exact moment for months. He slung the thick canvas strap over his shoulder, the heavy bag resting securely against his hip. He turned back toward the living room, his eyes locking directly onto me. The sheer arrogance returned to his face, twisted into a feral, desperate sneer. "You think you are smart, bitch?" Marcus hissed, his voice dripping with triumphant malice. He adjusted the strap of his duffel bag, his lips curling into a wicked smile. "You think you finally won because you brought a few spreadsheets to a family dinner. I wired the rest of the liquidated funds to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands at 6 o'clock this morning. It is completely untraceable. The accounts are registered to anonymous shell corporations you will never find. You are too late. You cannot touch me." He spun on his heel and bolted for the front door. He moved with the frantic, terrifying speed of a man running for his absolute freedom, his sights set solely on the leased Porsche parked in the circular driveway. But David was not entirely finished. The older man let out a roar of primitive raw fury. He scrambled up from the Persian rug, ignoring the agonizing pain in his joints, and launched himself across the foyer. He dove at Marcus, attempting to tackle the younger man from behind before he could reach the heavy mahogany front doors. David's hands grabbed the fabric of Marcus's expensive jacket, his fingers digging in with the desperate, violent grip of a man trying to physically claw back his stolen future. Marcus did not even break his stride. Without turning around, he swung his right arm backward with ruthless efficiency. He drove his elbow viciously into David's ribs. The sickening thud of bone connecting with bone echoed loudly through the grand foyer. David let out a sharp, breathless grunt of sheer agony. His grip instantly failed. He crumpled to the polished marble floor, clutching his side and gasping desperately for air. Seeing her father brutally struck down, Valerie finally snapped out of her catatonic shock. She let out a piercing, hysterical scream that tore through the quiet suburban house, the sound echoing with pure terror. I did not flinch at the violence. I did not rush forward to help my father. I stood perfectly still, my leather briefcase resting against my leg, my posture entirely relaxed and clinically detached. I slowly raised my left arm and looked down at the sleek face of my wristwatch. The second hand ticked forward with precise, rhythmic certainty. I watched the dial, my expression cold and utterly isolated from the screaming and the chaotic violence unfolding in the foyer. 3. I said, my voice completely level, cutting through the noise. Marcus reached out and grabbed the brass handle of the heavy mahogany front door. 2. I continued, my eyes remaining fixed on the precise movement of the dial. Marcus ripped the front door open, the cool night air rushing into the stifling, panicked atmosphere of the grand foyer. He took a single triumphant step out onto the expansive brick porch, preparing to sprint toward his getaway car and vanish into the night. 1. The moment Marcus's leather shoe hit the exterior brick, the quiet suburban night erupted. A blinding, impenetrable wall of flashing red and blue strobe lights illuminated the darkness, casting harsh, frenetic shadows across Marcus's suddenly terrified face. The deafening, authoritative chirp of a police siren pierced the air, echoing violently through the exclusive neighborhood. Marcus froze completely, his duffel bag slipping from his shoulder, his eyes wide with absolute horror. The expansive circular driveway was not empty. It was swarming with over a dozen heavily armed FBI agents and local police officers, their tactical vests gleaming under the harsh spotlights, their weapons drawn and leveled directly at the front porch. "Get on the ground. Show me your hands. Get on the ground right now." The commands ripped through the cold night air, overlapping and echoing violently against the brick facade of the mansion. The lead FBI agent advanced up the walkway, his weapon locked squarely on the center of Marcus's chest. Behind him, a dozen other officers fanned out across the manicured lawn, forming an impenetrable barricade between the porch and the leased Porsche sitting in the driveway. Marcus stood absolutely paralyzed. The blinding red and blue strobe lights washed over his face, exposing the raw, unadulterated terror beneath his tailored clothes. His entire body trembled. The desperate adrenaline that had propelled him toward the door vanished instantly, replaced by the crushing realization that he had nowhere left to run. "Do it now," the agent bellowed, stepping onto the bottom stair. "Drop the bag and get on your knees." The heavy canvas strap slipped from Marcus's shoulder. The bulging black duffel bag hit the brick porch with a dull, heavy thud, the stacks of stolen cash and forged passports shifting uselessly inside. Marcus did not argue. He did not attempt to deploy his usual slick Wall Street charm. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the hard brick, raising his shaking hands above his head. He looked small. He looked utterly pathetic. I stepped through the open mahogany doorway and walked out onto the porch. The chaotic noise of the sirens and the shouting agents seemed to fade into a dull hum as I moved past the threshold. The freezing night air hit my face, but I did not shiver. I stopped 2 feet away from where Marcus knelt. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, pleading for a mercy he absolutely did not deserve. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg or barter, but I cut him off before a single sound could escape his throat. I filed a suspicious activity report and a full forensic audit with the SEC and the FBI at 6 o'clock yesterday morning. I said, my voice dropping to a deadly, chilling whisper that carried easily over the noise of the raid. Marcus flinched as if the words physically struck him. His jaw trembled. "Did you really think I would walk into this house tonight without already locking the doors behind you?" I asked, staring down at the man who had backhanded me across the face exactly 48 hours ago. I felt the phantom sting of that brutal slap against my cheek, and it only fueled the absolute coldness radiating through my chest. "You thought you were an untouchable genius because you knew how to set up a shell company in the Cayman Islands. You thought you could blind my arrogant father with confusing crypto jargon and slip out the back door with his entire life savings. But you are not a genius, Marcus. You are a sloppy, reckless, degenerate gambler, and you left a digital paper trail a mile wide." He squeezed his eyes shut, tears of total defeat spilling down his flushed cheeks. He was shaking so violently his teeth chattered. "Your offshore accounts were frozen an hour ago." I continued, leaning down slightly so he could hear every syllable of his complete destruction. "Every single cent you tried to wire out of the country this morning was intercepted, flagged, and seized by federal regulators. The smart contracts you bragged about were riddled with backdoors that took me less than an hour to unravel. I handed the feds your entire ledger on a silver platter. You have nothing. You are nothing." 2 FBI agents rushed up the brick steps. They grabbed Marcus roughly by the shoulders and shoved him face down against the cold, hard porch. He let out a pathetic, whimpering sob as they yanked his arms forcefully behind his back. The expensive fabric of his torn designer jacket scraped against the rough masonry. I watched the agent pull a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. The sharp, metallic ratcheting sound of the cuffs locking around Marcus's wrists was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of absolute, undeniable justice. "Enjoy the free bracelets, Marcus," I said, stepping back to give the agents room to work. They hauled him to his feet. He was limp, dead weight. He did not look at me again. He kept his chin tucked firmly against his chest, trying to hide his face as the agents dragged him down the steps and hauled him across the manicured lawn. I watched as they pushed him roughly into the back of a waiting police cruiser. The heavy metal door slammed shut, sealing his fate. I stood on the porch for a long moment, watching the red and blue lights bounce off the neighboring houses. The manicured lawns and towering oak trees of the elite subdivision were bathed in the frantic emergency strobe lights. The curtains of the expensive estates across the street were twitching. The elite country club neighbors Valerie so desperately wanted to impress were all awake, standing at their windows watching the golden boy of Wall Street get hauled away in the back of a squad car like a common thief. The public humiliation was absolute and irreversible. It was a stain they would never wash out of their pristine social fabric. I took a deep breath of the crisp winter air, letting the profound satisfaction settle deep into my bones. The financial parasite had been completely excised. The threat was neutralized. I had done my job perfectly. I had dismantled the illusion they valued over my own existence. Slowly I turned around. The open mahogany door framed the interior of the grand foyer like a tragic theatrical stage. The flashing police lights cast erratic shifting shadows across the marble floor, and the expensive Persian rugs illuminating the absolute wreckage of my family. My father was still crumpled on the floor, clutching his bruised ribs and gasping for breath, his face pale and drawn tight with physical and financial agony. My mother was kneeling beside the coffee table, weeping uncontrollably into her hands, the broken string of pearls scattered randomly around her knees. Valerie was sitting exactly where I had left her on the velvet couch, her ruined designer skirt stained with dark coffee staring blankly at the wall, as her entire reality burned to ashes around her. They were completely broken. Their wealth, their status, their arrogant superiority had all been stripped away in a matter of minutes. I stepped back across the threshold into the house, closing the heavy front door behind me, shutting out the sirens and locking us all inside the quiet devastation of their own making. I looked at the three of them, letting the heavy, suffocating silence stretch. They had nothing left, and they had absolutely no one to blame but themselves. The flashing red and blue strobe lights painted frantic, erratic shadows across the grand foyer walls before slowly fading down the long, tree-lined street. The wail of the police sirens grew distant, turning into a muted hum before vanishing completely into the freezing winter night. I stood in the open doorway, watching the tail lights of the federal convoy disappear, taking the architect of my family's financial ruin away in iron chains. I reached out and grabbed the heavy brass handle of the mahogany door. I pulled it shut with a solid, definitive thud. The heavy latch clicked into place, instantly cutting off the biting wind and sealing the house in an absolute suffocating silence. The quiet was far more violent than the screaming had been. It was the heavy, crushing stillness of total annihilation. I turned around and surveyed the wreckage of the sprawling living room. It looked like a bomb had gone off inside a museum. The antique ceramic side table lay in jagged shards across the Persian rug. The dark coffee Marcus had spilled was slowly seeping deeper into the pristine white fabric of the velvet sofa, permanently ruining it. David was still on the floor, clutching his bruised ribs. His face was a ghastly shade of gray, and his breathing was shallow and ragged. The blustering, intimidating patriarch who had ruled this family with an iron fist for decades was completely gone. In his place was a broken old man who had just handed his entire life savings to a charismatic parasite. Valerie had not moved a single inch. She remained seated on the ruined sofa, staring blankly at the empty space where her husband had been standing just minutes ago. Her designer clothes were rumpled, her perfect hair was a mess, and her eyes were completely vacant. The reality of her situation had short-circuited her brain. She was married to a federally indicted fraudster. Her Hamptons estate, her luxury cars, her entire identity as a wealthy elite socialite had evaporated into thin air. She had nothing left to brag about and no one left to look down on. Then there was my mother. Helen was still kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the scattered pearls of her broken necklace. Her makeup was smeared across her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. She was trembling violently, her breath hitching in small, pathetic gasps. For a long moment, nobody spoke. They simply existed in the toxic ruins of their own arrogance. Slowly, David shifted his gaze. His bloodshot eyes found my face. He looked at my calm posture. He looked at the leather briefcase resting by my side, holding the absolute proof of Marcus's crimes. The gears in his mind slowly began to turn, fighting through the shock and the panic. He remembered what I had just said on the porch. I had filed the federal reports. I had tracked the offshore accounts. I had frozen the assets. I was not the jealous failure they had branded me. I was a highly successful forensic accountant who owned my own firm. I had the power to summon the FBI to their doorstep and freeze international wire transfers before the sun came up. A sickening realization washed over David's face, followed instantly by a desperate, feral gleam. He did not look at me with pride or remorse. He looked at me as a resource. He realized I was the only person left in his life who held any actual power. Helen saw the shift in her husband's eyes and followed his gaze. She looked up at me from the floor. The disdain and constant disappointment that had clouded her vision every time she looked at me for the past 30 years vanished. It was replaced by a look of sheer desperate expectation. The pivot was so instantaneous it was genuinely repulsive to witness. She scrambled forward. She did not bother to stand up. She crawled across the expensive Persian rug, the silk fabric of her designer blouse dragging against the floor. She moved with a pathetic, frantic urgency, completely abandoning her refined country club dignity. She reached me and threw herself forward. Her hands clamped around my ankle. Her manicured fingers dug into my skin with a bruising, desperate grip. "Maya, thank God you caught him," Helen gasped, her voice cracking and pitching high with hysteria. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face twisted in a mask of entitled panic. "Thank God you knew what he was doing. You own that investment company, Maya. You have millions in your corporate accounts. You know how all of this works. You have to refund our retirement money. We are blood." I stared down at her. I did not move my leg. I did not attempt to step away. I simply looked at the hands gripping my ankle. They were perfectly manicured. The nails were painted a soft, elegant pink. The skin was smooth and smelling faintly of her expensive signature perfume. I stared at those hands and felt a cold, clinical detachment wash through my veins, freezing any lingering trace of familial obligation. These were the exact same hands that had watched me bleed 48 hours ago. When I first tried to warn them about Marcus, when I first brought the initial discrepancies to a family dinner, he had cornered me in the hallway. When I refused to back down, he had struck me. He had backhanded me across the face with such force that my lip had split open against my teeth. My mother had been standing right there. She had watched the golden boy strike her own daughter. She had watched the blood drip down my chin. She had not screamed. She had not called the police. She had not rushed to my side to see if I was hurt. Instead, she had calmly walked over to the dining table, picked up a pristine white linen napkin, and handed it to Marcus. She had handed him the napkin so he could wipe my blood off his knuckles before it stained the cuffs of his tailored shirt. She had told me to stop causing drama and ruining the evening. She had chosen the illusion of his wealth over my physical safety without a second's hesitation. Now she was clinging to my leg, invoking the very blood she had so easily ignored when it was spilling down my face. She did not care that I had been right. She did not feel an ounce of genuine remorse for how she had treated me. She was simply trying to attach herself to a new host now that her previous one was sitting in the back of a federal squad car. "Maya, please," Helen begged, shaking my leg, her voice echoing shrilly in the quiet foyer. "You cannot let us lose the house. You have the money. You have to fix this for us." I looked from her desperate clinging hands up to her tear-soaked face. The silence in the room stretched, pulling taut and sharp. I leaned down slowly, deliberately, ignoring the gasps from David and Valerie, who were watching with bated breath, expecting me to yield as I always had. I reached down and grasped my mother's wrists. I did not speak. I simply applied steady, unyielding pressure. I dug my fingers into her skin and slowly, methodically pried her manicured fingers off my leg one by one. She whimpered, trying to hold on, but I forced her hands away and took a single step back, leaving her kneeling on the floor with nothing to hold on to. I locked eyes with her, watching the hope drain from her face and shatter into absolute despair. "I am not an ATM for your willful ignorance." Helen scrambled backward as if my words had physically burned her. She collapsed entirely against the base of the coffee table, her manicured hands covering her face as she descended into loud, ugly sobs. The grand foyer, usually a monument to their pristine upper-class lives, now echoed with the pathetic sounds of their ruin. David forced himself up from the floor. He leaned heavily against the armrest of the ruined velvet couch, his breathing labored, and his face an unhealthy shade of mottled purple. He looked at his weeping wife, then at the shattered antique table, and finally at me. The sheer audacity of my refusal seemed to temporarily override his physical pain. He drew himself up to his full height, attempting to summon the ghosts of his former patriarchal authority. "You listen to me, Maya!" He snarled, his voice shaking with a toxic mixture of desperation and furious entitlement. "You do not get to walk into my house and dictate terms to us. We gave you life. We put a roof over your head. We clothed you and fed you and paid for your existence. You owe us. Family takes care of family. You have a moral obligation to fix this. You run a multi-million-dollar firm. You will transfer the funds to cover our losses, and you will do it tonight." I stared at him. The absolute delusion required to demand a multi-million-dollar bailout after handing his entire fortune to a criminal was staggering. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The cold, hard facts were sharp enough to cut straight to the bone. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air of the room. "You paid for my basic childhood necessities because that is the legal requirement of a parent. The moment I turned 18, you cut me off. I paid my own way through college. I built my own firm from the ground up while you poured every spare cent you had into funding Valerie's luxury lifestyle and parading Marcus around your country club. You did not invest in me. You invested in an illusion. And now that illusion has bankrupted you." David slammed his fist against the back of the sofa. "The money has to be somewhere," he bellowed, spittle flying from his lips. "You just said you froze the accounts. You just told the feds where it is. If the feds have it, then they can give it back. Tell your contacts at the SEC to release the funds back to my primary accounts." I actually let out a dry, hollow laugh. It was a harsh sound devoid of any humor. "You truly do not understand how any of this works, David. You willingly signed over power of attorney to a con artist because he wore a nice suit. You gave a degenerate gambler complete legal authorization to liquidate your entire portfolio. He did not invest your retirement in high-yield corporate bonds. He funneled it into illegal offshore sports betting syndicates. He lost millions betting on point spreads and rigged matches. What little cash he had left in those Cayman accounts was immediately seized by international authorities the moment I filed the SAR." David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color began to rapidly drain from his flushed face. "That money was gambled away and seized as federal evidence." I continued, stepping closer to him, delivering the final devastating blow. "There is no magic refund. The federal government does not reimburse greedy investors who willingly hand their money to criminals. Those seized funds will be tied up in international litigation and federal asset forfeiture courts for the next decade. And even if a judge eventually orders restitution, Marcus is entirely broke. You are never seeing a single penny of those $2 million ever again." The air seemed to leave David's lungs all at once. He gripped the sofa tighter, his knuckles turning white as his legs began to tremble. "It gets worse," I said, refusing to let him look away from the absolute wreckage of his life. "Marcus did not just drain your liquid assets. He used your power of attorney to take out massive leverage loans against this house to cover his margin calls. You are in default on multiple high-interest loans you do not even know you possess. The banks will begin foreclosure proceedings by the end of the week. You cannot pay your property taxes. You cannot pay your credit cards. You have zero capital and massive liabilities." David shook his head slowly, his eyes wide and vacant. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "No, that is impossible. We have assets, we have the house, we have the cars. You are going to have to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy." I stated, my words dropping like anvils onto the Persian rug. "Do you know what Chapter 7 means, David? It means total liquidation. A court-appointed trustee will seize everything you own to satisfy your creditors. They will take this house. They will repossess your leased Mercedes and Valerie's Range Rover. Your country club memberships will be immediately revoked. The antique furniture, the jewelry, the art on these walls, it will all be cataloged, seized, and sold at public auction. You will be stripped down to the absolute legal minimum." The psychological collapse was instantaneous and absolute. David realized in that exact moment that his entire identity was gone. He was no longer the arrogant, wealthy patriarch commanding respect in elite social circles. He would never walk onto his pristine golf course again. His friends would read about his spectacular financial ruin in the local business journals. He would be a pariah, a destitute, broken old man forced to live on meager social security checks in a rented apartment. The weight of his new reality crushed him completely. David let out a strangled, agonizing wail. He slid down the side of the velvet couch, his knees hitting the floor with a heavy thud. He buried his face in his hands and began to weep. It was not a dignified cry. It was the loud, guttural sobbing of a man who had just lost his entire world. He wept for his lost status, his lost wealth, and the golf games he would never play again. I watched him cry, feeling absolutely nothing. Suddenly, a sharp, frantic movement caught the corner of my eye. Valerie had finally snapped out of her catatonic state. Watching her arrogant father reduced to a sobbing puddle on the floor broke the final fragile thread holding her sanity together. But her mind simply could not accept the truth. She could not process that her perfect, handsome husband was a federal criminal who had destroyed her life. Her mind desperately sought a scapegoat, and it locked entirely onto me. Valerie stood up from the ruined sofa. Her hands were clenched into tight fists, her fingernails digging into her palms. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. Her chest heaved as she glared at me, her eyes burning with a venomous, psychotic hatred. "You set this up!" Valerie screamed, her voice tearing through the house like a siren. She lunged forward, closing the distance between us in 2 frantic steps. "You ruined my marriage. I am going to sue you for everything you own." I did not even raise my hands to defend myself. Valerie was blindingly fast, but completely uncoordinated, driven entirely by a sudden surge of frantic, unhinged emotion. As she lunged at my face with her fingers curved like claws, I simply shifted my weight and took a calculated step to the right. Her momentum carried her straight past me. She tripped over the thick edge of the Persian rug and slammed hard against the heavy mahogany console table, sending a decorative brass lamp crashing to the marble floor in a shower of sparks and broken glass. She spun around, panting heavily, her perfectly highlighted hair falling wildly across her face. Her designer skirt was stained and twisted. She looked like a deranged stranger, completely stripped of the polished country club elegance she had wielded like a weapon her entire life. "Sue me," I asked, my voice echoing with pure glacial contempt. I tilted my head and looked at my older sister, feeling nothing but absolute disgust for the pathetic creature standing in front of me. "Sue me with what lawyer, Valerie? With what money? You have not worked a single day in your entire privileged life. You have never held a job, never paid your own bills, and never existed outside the protective bubble of Daddy's bank account." She glared at me, her chest heaving as she struggled to form words through her blind rage. "I will destroy you!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "I will hire the best legal team in the state, and I will take everything you own." "You cannot even afford the filing fee for a lawsuit, Valerie," I stated, stepping toward her, forcing her to hear the freezing reality of her new life. "The federal government has seized all of Marcus's domestic accounts and flagged every single credit card attached to his name. Your platinum cards are already declining. Your endless shopping sprees are officially over. Your husband is a federal criminal who just robbed your father blind." Valerie shook her head violently, refusing to accept the truth. "It is my money," she shrieked, stomping her foot against the marble. "It is my husband's money. You stole it from us. Oh, and here is a fun fact about federal wire fraud and tax evasion." I continued, my tone dropping into a deadly clinical register. "Since you eagerly filed joint tax returns with Marcus every single year of your marriage to claim his fraudulent income, the IRS is holding you completely liable." Valerie froze, the breath hitching in her throat. "That signature makes you legally culpable," I explained, watching the arrogant defiance slowly drain from her features. "The Internal Revenue Service does not care that you were too stupid or too lazy to ask where the millions of dollars were coming from. They hold you jointly, and severally liable for every penny of unpaid taxes and fraudulent gains. You are not a victim in the eyes of the federal government, Valerie. You are a co-conspirator. No, she whispered, her eyes darting around the room in absolute panic. No, I did not know anything. I just signed the papers he gave me. Ignorance is not a legal defense, I countered ruthlessly. The agents are not just taking Marcus's bank accounts. They are coming for everything bought with those stolen funds to satisfy the massive federal tax liens. They will be seizing your entire collection of Hermes Birkin bags. They are going to confiscate your Cartier watches, your diamond tennis bracelets, and your custom wedding ring. Your leased white Range Rover sitting in the driveway will be towed by federal marshals before Friday. You are going to be stripped down to the clothes on your back. The words struck her with physical force. Her eyes went wide as the full magnitude of her destruction finally penetrated her thick wall of denial. She looked down at the massive diamond engagement ring sparkling on her left hand. The realization that none of her treasured possessions belonged to her anymore finally cracked her fragile mind. Valerie let out a guttural, agonizing scream. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated torment echoing through the high-vaulted ceilings of the mansion. Her entire identity, her superiority, her elite social status, evaporated into the frigid night air. She fell to her knees, her legs giving out completely beneath the crushing weight of her new reality. She hit the hard marble floor and curled her body forward, burying her face in her hands. She wept with a violent, ugly intensity, her glamorous world completely annihilated. Helen remained paralyzed near the shattered coffee table, unable to comfort her golden child, because Helen herself was drowning in the exact same nightmare. The room was filled only with the sound of Valerie's hysterical sobbing and Helen's ragged, terrified breathing. I stood over them, a silent witness to the ultimate destruction of the toxic hierarchy that had defined my entire existence. I had exposed the rot at the core of this family and watched the entire structure collapse in on itself. I adjusted my grip on my leather briefcase, preparing to turn around and walk out the front door forever. There was nothing left for me here. Then David spoke. His voice was no longer the furious, booming roar that had terrified me as a child. It was a raspy, broken whisper that barely carried across the quiet foyer. "Maya," he croaked. I slowly turned my attention back to the man sitting slumped against the velvet couch. His face was ghastly white, completely devoid of all blood. His hands were shaking so violently that he had to clasp them together against his chest to keep them still. He looked like a man staring directly into the abyss of his own grave. "Maya, I cross-collateralized this house," David said, his voice vibrating with absolute terror. The crying in the room seemed to momentarily pause as his words hung in the suffocating air. He swallowed hard tears welling in his bloodshot eyes as he looked up at me. To help Marcus secure a massive commercial business loan last year, he confessed, his chest heaving with panic. He told me it was a bridge loan for a real estate acquisition. He needed a guarantor with substantial hard assets. I put the deed to this property up as collateral to secure the financing. The bank is going to take our home too. The sheer magnitude of his financial incompetence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I stared down at David, the untouchable patriarch who had lectured me about wealth management my entire life. He had literally signed away his castle for a con man. He had secretly leveraged his ancestral home, the ultimate symbol of his status and ego, simply because Marcus played golf with the right people and wore the right tailored suits. The silence following his confession was absolute, broken only by the ragged, desperate sound of his breathing. David shifted his weight, dragging his body across the ruined carpet until he was practically kneeling at my feet. The man who had refused to acknowledge my professional success because I had chosen the wrong career path was now looking up at me with the frantic eyes of a starving beggar. "Maya, please," he whimpered, tears mixing with the cold sweat on his pale face. "I will sign whatever you want. I will make you the sole beneficiary of the estate. You can dictate the terms. Just buy the debt. You have millions in your corporate accounts, I know you do. When the bank forecloses, they will put this property up for public auction. You can buy it. You can buy the estate directly from the bank and hold the deed in your name. We can stay here. We can pay you rent. You cannot let the bank take my home. You cannot let the public see us evicted. It would kill your mother. It would kill me." He looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes, desperately waiting for my inherent sense of familial duty to override my logic. He was betting on the old Maya, the desperate daughter who had spent decades craving a single ounce of his approval. He genuinely believed that if he offered me the deed to his kingdom, I would eagerly pay the ransom to save his throne. I looked away from his pleading face and let my gaze sweep across the lavish living room. I looked at the towering marble fireplace where expensive, professionally framed family portraits rested on the mantel. Portraits that featured David, Helen, Valerie, and Marcus perfectly posed, perfectly smiling and completely excluding me. I was the dark spot on their pristine canvas, deliberately left out of every holiday card and family newsletter. I looked at the grand mahogany staircase where I used to sit hidden in the shadows as a teenager, listening to the extravagant catering staff, setting up for elite social parties I was never invited to attend. I looked at the antique Persian rug, where I was currently standing, the exact same rug where I had been forced to endure countless lectures about my inadequacies. This house had never been a home to me. It had been a museum of my own failure. It was a physical monument to my permanent status as a second-class citizen in my own family. Every crystal chandelier, every piece of custom furniture, every square inch of crown molding represented a resource they had gladly spent on maintaining their wealthy image instead of investing in their youngest daughter. The memories of their cruelty did not bring tears to my eyes. They brought absolute, unyielding clarity. I looked back down at David, then at Helen, who was still weeping silently on the floor, and finally at Valerie, who was staring at me with hollow, defeated eyes. They were complete strangers to me now. When Marcus slapped me, I said, my voice ringing with an absolute glacial authority, "You told me to get out." I paused, watching the remaining blood completely drain from Helen's face as she remembered the exact moment. She remembered calmly handing Marcus a white linen napkin to wipe my blood from his knuckles. I remembered David opening the front door and demanding I leave the premises for disrespecting his brilliant son-in-law. When I dropped out of college, I continued my words, striking them like physical blows. "You called me a disgrace. You told your country club friends I was a failure. You erased me from your narrative because I refused to pursue the useless degree you demanded. I built my own life with my own hands while you poured your entire fortune into a criminal." I took a slow step back, severing the final invisible tether that had bound me to them for 3 decades. "Now you want the disgrace to buy you a house? No." David gasped, clutching his chest as if I had driven a physical blade directly through his ribs. "We are your parents," he wheezed, desperation clawing violently at his throat. "You cannot do this. You cannot just leave us here to lose everything. We will have nothing. We will be nobody." I leaned down and picked up my leather briefcase. The handle felt cool and solid in my grip. It held the forensic evidence of their ruin, but more importantly, it held the absolute proof of my own competence. It felt like reality. It felt like power. I straightened my posture and looked at the 3 of them one last time. They were broken, bankrupt, and entirely alone. They had constructed a massive house of cards built entirely on arrogance and greed, and the wind had finally come to blow it all down. "You bet everything on the golden child and her fraud of a husband." I stated my words final and absolute. "Enjoy the payout." I turned my back on them. Immediately, the foyer erupted into a chaotic chorus of wailing and sobbing. Helen began to scream my name, her voice pitching into absolute hysteria, begging me not to walk away. David shouted for me to come back, his words crumbling into a wet, violent coughing fit. Valerie just wept, a steady, broken sound of pure materialistic agony as she mourned the permanent death of her luxury lifestyle. I did not stop. I did not hesitate. I walked across the marble floor, my footsteps echoing with absolute finality over their frantic cries. I reached the heavy mahogany front door, grabbed the brass handle, and pulled it open. The freezing winter wind rushed in, sweeping past me into the house, carrying the bitter cold they had always subjected me to. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. The heavy metal latch clicked firmly into place, instantly severing the sounds of their destruction. The heavy wooden barrier trapped their sobbing inside, leaving me standing in the profound, beautiful silence of the winter night. I walked down the stone steps and crossed the circular driveway toward my car. The frost crunched beneath my boots, a crisp and grounding sound. The flashing lights of the federal convoy were long gone. The neighborhood was quiet, completely oblivious to the empire that had just violently collapsed inside the grand estate. I opened my car door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The heater hummed quietly, bringing a blast of warm air into the cabin. I looked at the house one last time through the rearview mirror. The massive windows glowed with warm light, but I knew the interior was now completely hollow, filled only with the ghosts of their arrogance and the harsh reality of their impending destitution. I shifted the car into drive. As I pulled out of the driveway and drove away into the dark night, I took a deep breath. I felt lighter than I had in 30 years. The morning fog was just beginning to burn off the dark waters of the Puget Sound, revealing the sharp, striking angles of the downtown Seattle skyline. I stood on the wraparound glass balcony of my corporate executive suite, letting the crisp Pacific Northwest breeze wash over my face. The steam rising from my black coffee curled into the cool morning air. It was a beautiful, vibrant Tuesday. Exactly 6 months had passed since I walked out of that suffocating mahogany door in the dead of a freezing East Coast winter. 6 months since I left the toxic wreckage of my blood relatives behind me for good. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The bitter, rich taste grounded me entirely in the present reality. I was no longer the anxious, desperate daughter seeking validation from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. I was not the family failure. I was not the disgrace. I was the founder and CEO of a premier forensic accounting and financial risk management firm. The view from the 32nd floor was breathtaking. It was a physical manifestation of everything I had built with my own 2 hands. I had constructed an empire out of pure grit and relentless determination, while my family had constructed a fragile illusion built entirely on arrogance and fraud. I turned away from the sweeping ocean view and stepped back inside the warmth of my office. The heavy glass door slid shut behind me, instantly muting the distant sounds of the bustling city below. My workspace was sleek and modern, designed with clean lines, natural wood, and wide-open spaces. It reflected absolute transparency. It was the exact opposite of the dark, oppressive mansion I had grown up in. I checked my reflection in the glass panel. My posture was straight, my shoulders were relaxed, and my eyes held a fierce, undeniable calm. I walked down the short, sunlit corridor and pushed open the double glass doors to the main boardroom. A wave of warm, genuine energy greeted me immediately. The long, polished oak table was surrounded by 10 of the sharpest, most dedicated professionals in the financial industry. These were my senior analysts, my lead investigators, and my corporate legal counsel. They were laughing, sharing stories, and pouring fresh coffee before the meeting began. This was my team. More importantly, this was my true family. The family I had actively chosen. There was no toxic hierarchy here. There were no silent judgments or passive-aggressive comparisons. We operated on mutual respect, absolute competence, and fierce, unwavering loyalty. When I walked into the room, the casual chatter naturally subsided, but the warmth remained. They looked at me, not with the disdain my parents had always wielded, but with absolute professional reverence. I took my seat at the head of the table, feeling a profound sense of belonging. "Good morning, everyone," I said, projecting my voice clearly across the room. "Let us finalize the sterling corporate acquisition." My lead senior partner, a brilliant former federal prosecutor named Elias, slid a thick portfolio across the polished wood table. He gave me a sharp, triumphant nod. "The final forensic audit is completely verified," Elias stated, his voice echoing with absolute confidence. "Our team uncovered the hidden liabilities their previous auditors completely missed." We traced the shell companies, tracked the inflated revenue streams, and exposed the exact structural weaknesses you suspected were there from day one. By exposing those massive financial discrepancies, we just saved our client $40 million on the final acquisition price. They are absolutely thrilled with our work, Maya. A murmur of approval went around the table. I looked at the incredible faces of my team. They were sharp, intelligent, and fiercely protective of our firm's reputation. We had spent the last 3 weeks tearing apart a massive corporate merger, exposing the exact kind of financial rot that men like Marcus built their entire lives upon. I thrived in this environment. I was a predator in the world of financial deception, and my firm was the absolute apex predator of the West Coast. Elias handed me a sleek silver pen and tapped the bottom line of the final master service agreement. Our client has officially signed the retainer for our firm to oversee the entire corporate restructuring process. Elias continued, a wide grin breaking across his face. It is a 5-year exclusive contract. It officially makes this our most profitable quarter in the entire history of the firm. I took the heavy silver pen. I looked down at the crisp white paper. This signature represented so much more than just a multi-million-dollar revenue stream. It represented absolute permanent financial and emotional independence. I did not need David's corrupted wealth. I did not need Helen's superficial country club connections. I had forged my own path, and it was paved with solid, undeniable reality. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with a smooth, confident flourish. The boardroom erupted into genuine enthusiastic applause. My colleagues clapped and cheered, sharing bright smiles of shared victory. I smiled back, a deep, authentic expression of pure joy that reached all the way to my eyes. The toxic, heavy burden of my past was completely gone. I was entirely unburdened, completely free, and glowing with absolute, unshakable confidence. "Thank you, Elias," I said, projecting my voice over the celebration. "And thank you to everyone in this room. Your dedication is what makes this firm untouchable. Take the rest of the afternoon off. You have all earned it." The team began to pack up their laptops and files, chatting excitedly about weekend plans. I remained at the head of the table, finishing my coffee and basking in the profound peace of my own making. As the room slowly cleared out, the heavy glass door swung open again. My executive assistant Sarah walked in. She was sharp, hyper-organized, and never interrupted a boardroom session unless it was absolutely essential. She walked briskly toward my chair, holding a thick, sealed manila folder. "Excuse me, Maya," Sarah said, keeping her voice low and completely professional. "I know you asked me to keep tabs on the fallout from the East Coast. The private investigator just sent over the finalized update dossier regarding those old clients." She emphasized the words "old clients" exactly as I had instructed her to. To the rest of my firm, my family was simply a closed case, a resolved issue of massive financial fraud. Sarah placed the heavy dossier directly in front of me on the polished oak table. "I have compiled the legal summaries, the court dockets, and the public bankruptcy filings," she explained. "It details exactly where everything ended up after the federal indictments went through." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "That will be all." She nodded and quietly exited the boardroom, leaving me entirely alone in the massive glass room. I stared at the blank manila cover. Inside those pages was the final definitive conclusion to the empire of David and Helen. I reached forward and flipped open the heavy cover to see exactly where my family ended up. The core lesson from Maya's powerful journey is that true vindication requires no retaliation. When betrayed by toxic family, our natural instinct is to prove our worth or actively seek revenge. However, ultimate power lies in simply walking away. By refusing to save her family from their self-inflicted ruin, Maya allowed their inherent arrogance to naturally orchestrate their downfall. As Marcus faced prison and her parents lost everything, she realized real triumph is stepping out of the blast radius and building your own empire. Have you ever walked away to protect your peace? Subscribe to our channel and comment below.